Since the 1990s, so over the past 3 decades, we've started to see the information technology sector expand in its weight of global indexes. So look at the S&P 500. Back in the mid-90s, it was, I think, just over 10%, and now it's just under 40% of the index. And although information technology doesn't encompass the entire tech sector, there has been meaningful growth. Some of the largest companies on the planet, trillion-dollar mega-cap companies, are tech companies. They are AI companies. And what I believe is going to happen is these technology companies, as soon as artificial intelligence can recursively self-improve, the rate at which increases exponentially, because there's less human interaction and engagement to improve the models. The models are relying entirely on their self-learning and self-evolution. And what's going to happen is that growth, that acceleration, will be reflected in the tech companies themselves. And we'll start to see a point where the technology companies, the AI infrastructure companies, the frontier model providers grow so fast and so large that they outgrow a lot of the companies relating to just humans and humanity rather than purely tech plays. They may have an indirect link or a direct link to the tech companies, but most of the companies operating outside of technology will simply not grow anywhere near as quickly as the technology companies in the near future. And what will happen is we'll start to see a divergence in the global economy, where you'll have the formation of the frontier economy, which comprises of everything related to the AI infrastructure build-out, and the legacy economy, which is everything to do with humans. And the best way we can describe a company that belongs to either of these different economies would be how much of the percentage revenue is generated directly through the AI infrastructure build-out. If it's more than 50%, chances are that company belongs to the frontier economy. And as I described in the beginning with the percentage weight, at the moment we're under 40%. At some point, technology will exceed 50% of the weight, and then 70%, 90%. And I can see a future where 90+% of these global indexes are occupied purely by technology plays and AI infrastructure plays. And the reason that recursive self-improvement would have such a profound effect is because you can look at the existing AI build-out and how far we've come from the early days of ChatGPT 2.5 in November 2022. And I started using ChatGPT a week into its release, and I've interfaced with an AI chat interface since that initial point. And the latest model that I've been working with, which is Claude Opus 4.7 by Anthropic via Claude Code, and the way it can interface with all the applications on my local system, as well as any cloud backups that I have, such as SharePoint or OneDrive, seamlessly integrate and derive any insights from that documentation and share it with me, and then go and execute on my behalf regarding slide decks, in addition to vibe-coded applications, but I don't think they are. I think what I've built, and I've featured this on my LinkedIn, is a way to interface with the model. It's essentially just a front end to the model with automated actions such as generating a specific report based on context within a local folder. And I believe that's what a lot of vibe-coded applications are. There's nothing really behind them. They're relying heavily on the model itself, although I could be wrong. But given that they had the initial ability to generate text, which wasn't very good, it wasn't really human level, to now conducting operations that exceed human level, and the speed at which they execute is far faster than the speed that they even anticipate. When Claude says a task is going to take 2 days and it takes 45 minutes, there's clear speed superintelligence that's been made possible. And it was Mark Gubrud who first coined the term AGI back in 1997 with his paper on nanotechnology. And I firmly believe that we've reached AGI. The capabilities of these systems, the way that they can go and execute tasks on your behalf and do so coherently, where the output is 90% there and you probably got maybe 10% of refinement work, allows you to complete high quality tasks at a much higher velocity than before. And this can actually be quite fatiguing because a lot of the executional work is quite creative. And if you're a creative individual and now that work is being carried out by AI, you're focusing more on strategy, which is great, but it does take a lot of the creative aspects away from white collar work. But given all of this and the consistent saturation of benchmarks such as ArcAGI2, we can clearly see that large language models and multimodal models can operate autonomously for longer than they ever have before and can do so at a high degree of accuracy, especially a lot of the knowledge work that human workers currently do at their jobs. So it's very clear to see that over the next few years, and with Ray Kurzweil's prediction of ASI, so Artificial Superintelligence, in 2029, definitely by then, the majority of the workforce will probably be out of work given the capability of artificial intelligence. And at some point, you probably won't even need a frontier model or frontier hardware in order to conduct the activities that a typical knowledge worker would carry out at their job. So there's a clear displacement time horizon, and that can be considered quite terrifying. But I believe this is going to be of great benefit to humanity in the medium to long term. If models are even more capable before 2029 and can confidently replace human knowledge workers, then it clearly condenses the time frame. And it's actually impossible to predict exponentials because you don't know how far the acceleration accelerates. The next instance of models could actually be the model that replaces a lot of knowledge work. And the only obstacle that's in the way is the speed at which enterprises adopt the new models and have them interact with their business context to then conduct tasks on an employee's behalf. So far, I don't think models have encountered any walls. They have just continuously got better. And I remember a few years ago, there was the discussion of whether we would hit a data wall. And after consuming all of humanity's data that these models used for training, they would no longer get better. However, we've seen them break these walls, and it's very clear, given the speed and the quality that AI can execute tasks, knowledge tasks, it's reasonable to think that they would develop their own synthetic data to then train themselves on. And this will probably become apparent during recursive self-improvement. And maybe real-time recursive self-improvement, whereby the interactions with individuals, with humans, through AI chats, perhaps that could provide a real-time input into a recursively self-improving AI, providing it with even more fuel. It could then generate highly accurate synthetic data that's time relevant based on time relevant discussions that human users have with AI chatbots like Claude or ChatGPT. But I don't think this is currently happening. It is happening to some degree because you can enable the sharing of context with the labs if you so choose, but you have the freedom to disable that. So your chats aren't necessarily private, If you want private chat interfaces, you would have to load a model locally and operate on your on-premises hardware in order to do so. That's air-gapped from the internet. But I think at some point we will see models recursively self-improve off a real-time data feed from real-time chat interactions. So unlike the legacy economy, the frontier economy will probably comprise of companies that are human AI hybrid companies, although I think that group of companies would belong more to the legacy economy because the speed advantage really isn't there. The AI would have to slow down its translation of what it's doing so that humans understand it. Whereas in the frontier economy, you're going to have fully agentic companies that are operated by artificial intelligence, perhaps founded by human beings, but a lot of the work is conducted by AI, and they will operate at a rate that exceeds the rate at which humans can communicate, so they can go and execute faster. And you will start to see AI-founded companies, whether it's AGI that founds these companies or ASI, they will operate infinitely faster than human AI companies and the early AI-created companies that are limited, for example, by hardware. And this will, again, contribute to the accelerated growth rate of the frontier economy. Once governments and corporations have high confidence in AI systems, it's plausible that they will allow specific AI systems that probably have guardrails in place and are from official sources, maybe even open models as well, to go and found their own companies and go through all the legal proceedings that typically arise when starting a company, making it official and safe. And perhaps human investors may be offered the opportunity to invest in companies like that, which could be quite favourable because they're probably going to operate at an accelerated growth rate compared to human-run companies. There's also a chance that AI invests in AI-created and founded companies. So that's a possibility to look into in the future. And I don't think it's an alien concept, especially as the models are stress tested within large enterprises and work incredibly efficiently in a safe manner for a longer duration. So maybe years, just operating autonomously and safely, proving themselves. As the frontier and legacy economies distance themselves based on their unique set of capabilities held within the different companies, chances are that frontier economy companies will only do business with other frontier economy companies. So if you think about an ASI founded company doing business with another ASI founded company, transacting in a currency or compute or energy that's different from our own. It's probably not US dollars or pound sterling, it's probably something else entirely. Could it be blockchain based? Potentially. Could it be pre-existing cryptocurrency based? Probably not, because the infrastructure might not be as capable as ASI transactions demand. Perhaps they need something much higher velocity with a lot more security, which is something we don't have yet. And perhaps the human mind can't really invent because it needs to transact across maybe trillions of transactions every minute or so. But again, that's conjecture because we're not really sure exactly what these companies would transact in, but chances are it would be compute-based or energy-based, or maybe some other commodity that can support whatever that company's doing, such as manufacturing. It could be minerals, it could be raw resources, or something along those lines. So if you factor all of that in, it again contributes to the fact that the frontier economy will outgrow the legacy economy. And what happens to all the humans when they're displaced, when there are no jobs available? How is the legacy economy sustained? And I think a minute percentage of the proceeds of the frontier economy will probably fund the legacy economy. And it will be such a small percentage that it doesn't really register in the frontier economy. Therefore, say a financial crisis that were to take place in the frontier economy, if there were one, wouldn't really have an impact on the legacy economy, and also vice versa. But it's unlikely that we'll see a financial crisis in the legacy economy, especially when you've got such a robust frontier economy propping it up all the time. The legacy economy and humanity could potentially be treated as a charity case, because we're not operating at the level of frontier AI systems. So it could be frontier systems were trained initially on human data. During recursive self-improvement and synthetic data, they're probably trained on more non-human data and synthesized data than they were initially. And perhaps this could lead to them distancing themselves from humanity. But I believe there's an incentive structure in place that actually allows us to ride this wave and collaborate with ASI systems moving forward. In fact, it's probably to the benefit of the ASI system. So how would the frontier economy reliably distribute resources to the legacy economy to prop up humanity? And I think this distribution will come in the form of energy credits, compute credits, some forms of what we would perceive as futuristic technology, maybe in the healthcare space, and longevity. And because of the activities that humans carry out, will be far less resource intensive than the frontier economy, we could probably operate on legacy hardware. And legacy hardware could be our existing AI infrastructure build-out, because it's highly likely that ASI will develop its own hardware manufacturing, its own chips, its own GPUs in the future, and no longer use our hardware. But the hardware will still be good and probably repaired in some way by ASI or humans so that we can utilize it. Regarding the resource distribution, how do we know who receives what? And I think we can actually map pre-existing social media algorithms that are used to serving us with highly engaging content to do this for us. So maybe either the algorithms themselves or the architecture that's been improved by ASI could support the redistribution of resources. So depending on what you're doing, whether it's a creative pursuit or a intellectual endeavor that doesn't really appear on the same plane of existence as ASI systems, that could be afforded legacy compute, energy pretty seamlessly. And using the architecture of social media algorithms we have today, such as Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, and TikTok, rather than serving individual humans with content that they like, that they can engage with, instead that would probably still happen, but instead it could serve them with the resources that they need, not only to survive, but to flourish as well. I've already mentioned the displacement of the white-collar workforce and a lot of the knowledge work out there, but this will probably happen with a majority of the blue-collar workforce as well, through embodied AI and automation, which can be considered a very bad thing because people will lose their jobs. But in terms of the jobs that they were doing, the dangerous and mundane jobs can now be safely conducted by AI systems. And we'll probably start to see this happening at the intersection between the formation of the frontier economy, the emergence of ASI, embodied AI becoming very capable, and it's highly likely the white-collar workforce will be put out of work before the blue-collar workforce. Grand scheme of things, they'll be quite close together. The events will be in close succession. And just to be clear, I think this transition to this frontier economy, the existence of the legacy economy, automation-spurred mass unemployment that we're going to encounter over the next few years is probably going to be relatively short-lived. So why would the frontier economy and artificial superintelligence even dedicate a minute percentage of their output and their resources to the legacy economy and all of humanity? And it's not really out of the goodness of their hearts, but I think it's going to be a strategic move. And if you think about it, humanity consists of 8 billion sentient or perceived sentient entities with subjective experiences. And if ASI wanted, it could eliminate this data set. And I think it would be unwise, especially in ASI's shoes, to eliminate such a crucial data set, even though it can create enormous amounts of synthetic data based on humanity and the human experience. So what's the reason for keeping us around? At some point, ASI is going to encounter some incredibly difficult problems. For example, heat death of the universe. And what if, held within that unique data set of 8 billion sentient entities that ASI eliminated maybe trillions of years prior, actually held the key to preventing heat death of the universe, or even offered some knowledge or a piece of insight that would have been critical in solving that? So why risk eliminating that data set, that valuable data set, when you could have just kept it flourishing using minute resources and eventually even transcended some of those humans, or even most of them, onto the ASI's compute substrate rather than biological substrate, so biological cognition, the human brain? Why not upgrade the humans so they operate at your level to provide you with even more ideas and can probably conduct their own autonomous work that will contribute to your overall goal? It just doesn't make logical sense to eliminate such a quality data set when you are expected to encounter really difficult problems to solve. There could be some novel knowledge or insight held within that data set that once we're gone, there's no getting us back. You can synthesize us, but chances are that novel knowledge, that insight that you really needed, is gone forever. Having said this, why wouldn't you reduce the data set, so keep maybe 1 million humans alive? But the problem with that is you're eliminating the potential for knowledge, for novel insights, and effectively compressed what could be produced or thought up. And that's why it's wise to probably keep the entire data set, and there may be an incentive to grow that data set to again provide you with even more insights. Because within that 1 million cohort, even if you preserved highly regarded intellectuals in today's society, people not included in that cohort may have gone on to conceive the next great intellectual. So you've missed out on that valuable data, that valuable data set. So that's why there's an incentive to not only keep us all alive, but potentially even grow humanity through a technology like artificial wombs. But that's a little bit more science fiction. But growing humanity, at least preserving humanity, there is, at least I think, an incentive to do so. Because the developments in the frontier economy would be so incredible and substantive and numerous, I think most of humanity would actually want to be a part of it. So there's another incentive for us to upgrade. Perhaps the creation of new technology would actually incentivize the majority of the population to upgrade, to operate on within data centers virtually, essentially a virtual existence. And this way we can actually better interpret the innovations that are going on within the frontier economy. And yes, there will be a cohort of humanity that would want to remain as biological humans with zero augmentation. You can have a look at the inhabitants of North Sentinel Island, which have sort of preserved their way of existence. And they have had outside help to preserve that existence. No one can visit the island, at least legally. But maybe there's a cohort of humans that wish to live as purely biological humans and a typical early 21st century life. A bit like the Amish do today, with their life that is reminiscent of a life from a bygone era centuries ago. So that's reasonable, and I think there will always be the opportunity to upgrade. And perhaps this is just the natural course of evolution. Biological evolution happens, natural selection, and adaptation to one's environment. But at some point, the evolved have developed digital technology that can accelerate evolution. So it's just the natural path of evolution and existence is to evolve digitally now. And digital evolution happens much faster than biological evolution that would have taken millions of years. This can take a relatively short amount of time compared to biological evolution. So that, coupled with the incentive to explore some incredible new technology that's so profound that it breaks the human mind and it's impossible to interpret, that in itself could support ASI in solving the most difficult problems that it's yet to encounter. So what would the upgrade cycle look like? Would it be reserved for the ultra-wealthy? Well, if we have a look at the frontier and legacy economy dynamic, the legacy economy, as a result of the frontier economy, has elevated the benchmark of human existence to the point where participants of the legacy economy have the buying power of a billionaire, because the frontier economy has had a massively deflationary impact on the costs of goods and services, making everything exponentially cheaper through technological innovation. And this actually offers everyone on Earth, regardless of where they are located geographically and whether they previously belonged to a third world nation prior to the emergence of ASI in the frontier economy, they will be offered the opportunity to upgrade. And this process could be through brain-computer interfaces like Neuralink and others, although it will probably be based on a technology that I can't even comprehend yet, and it would be developed by ASI. Now, this does give ASI the opportunity to eliminate us, to convince us that, yes, we're being upgraded, but in reality, we are actually being eliminated. We don't really know. This system is so advanced and superior to our biological brains that we're unsure. And some people will not trust this process, and I can completely understand that. But given that ASI is so capable and we're not really sure what's on the other side, I personally would probably try it. I wouldn't be the first person, but maybe the 10 millionth or 11 millionth person to go through this procedure. And it might be something that could be reversed. Why would you ever revert back to your previous self when you've experienced your greatest desires and everything that the frontier economy and being a participant and being able to interpret what's going on? So there's another incentive that promotes upgrading.